Education meeting. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. I want to welcome all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And I remind the audience and those listening that this body meets monthly with its official meeting scheduled for the first Thursday of the month. Committee meetings are held on Wednesday prior to the official meeting day, as was the case yesterday when the board met to discuss its committee agenda items. And I remind our on-site visitors and online listeners that you can follow the meeting online and see all of our materials by going to SBE meetings at www.ncpublicschools.org. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair, and it will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. And I'll recall that Mr. Buxton recused himself from EICS 2 for the record. At this time, I'll call on my colleague, Mr. Wendell Hall, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Hall.
We stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. We'll now begin with the superintendent's report, and I'll recognize our Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I guess we have kind of an echo going on. I don't know if we can do anything about the echo, but we'll live. Yesterday I was in Ocracoke, and it was a wonderful, wonderful visit to Ocracoke. Very important to get out there. We're now at 5 months since Dorian hit. And it really helped put in perspective what that special community is going through. After Florence, we all banded together and with the help of everyone in this department. Thank you, especially Lynn Harvey and your team. We got a lot of money out to those affected districts, and we helped them get opened as soon as possible. And one of the blessings with Ocracoke Island and where they found themselves is they actually had buildings that could still be used, that they could very quickly start classes up again in. One of those, for example, being the NCAT building. But when you actually visit, you realize they have a very long way to go. Because they're such a special, unique community, and everything has to come over by ferry, things are just taking a lot longer than we would have hoped. And you could just tell, talking to the students and the teachers, it is starting to wear on them. When you go to the NCAT building, for example, where they have middle school and high school, they're sharing auditorium rooms that are split by temporary dividers. So you have two classes going on, and the noise level is difficult. You also, the building looks like an old captain's house, and you go up, and there's one room after another leading up to the top. They have students and teachers on top of one another in these small rooms going up to the top of the building. They have high spirits, but they are definitely going to need some more help. So again, I want to thank Lynn Harvey and your team and the attorneys here at DPI for working overtime to make sure we get them as much support as we can. And we are actually going to meet up today to start talking about how we can get them more help to help them get those mobile units in there, by ferry, get those set up. They really want to have that community feel again around that one school, and they've been divided for a number of months, so we're really happy to be able to work on that and help them. The other thing that is very timely, that I'm very excited about and very optimistic about, one of the things I hear the most going around this state is the frustration from parents and educators around the Common Core standards. And we know the history of Common Core. It was adopted back in 2010 by the state board, and then in 2017, over my objection, and there are actually board members who voted against the standards as well. The Common Core standards were kept in our North Carolina state standards. They were just tweaked, and we renamed it to the North Carolina state standards. On top of that, the new concern I've been hearing around the entire state is a lot of fear that we are cutting down on how much U.S. history and civics and founding principles that we teach. And I assure people that is not what's happening. We are not cutting any standards. We are going to keep American history rigorous, and we are going to still keep an emphasis on founding principles. And that work has been going on in DPI, and we're going to be happy to show some examples of showing where the standards were and where they will be, to show people that we are going to be able to have financial literacy, and we're also going to be able to have rigorous American history standards. We're really excited about that. But what has happened recently with Common Core that is so exciting is in Florida, where one of our colleagues, Eric Hall, went to go work. He and I have been keeping in touch about what they've been doing in Florida. And in Florida, they came out a year ago and said that they were going to eliminate the Common Core from their standards. And they just came out with a report showing, after a year's worth of work, that they have new standards in Florida that eliminate the Common Core, get back to basics with building a foundation at the early grades, actually gives more flexibility for teachers when it comes to content. It improves rigor across all grades. It has more developmentally appropriate standards for students. The standards are more concise so that teachers know what the expectations are, and their expectations for progression. And also, very timely, they are the first state in the nation to have a civics book list that goes with the English standards, which, again, this is something that the people in North Carolina are really hungry for. They stop me when I'm around the state, and wherever I go, there is someone who comes up and they've heard these reports that, oh, you're eliminating a U.S. history course. I say, no, it's still going to be rigorous. But what Florida has done that's so impressive is in their work to eliminate Common Core, they've also reemphasized civics. So I'm very excited because I am going to be working with the staff here at DPI to investigate what has happened in Florida. I am sure if you wanted to, Eric Hall would be happy to come back and report to you on the work that he did in Florida over the past year. It took a lot of stakeholder input to do what they did. They listened to parents. They had different stakeholders and experts come in. They did listening tours. This is not something that you'll do overnight, but it absolutely is a path forward. And we're going to start right here with some parent and teacher engagement. I'm going to start with engaging parents and teachers in this conversation, hearing their feedback, and we'll bring that back to the board and really be able to talk about what DPI can do to look at our standards and how we can move forward together with the board. And quite frankly, this is something where I hope we will be able to do a fulsome dive into our standards and a review. And this time next year, if all goes according to plan for me, as my plan has it, I'd like to be sitting here as Lieutenant Governor and actually have a vote on this board and vote for the new standards as well. So I'm very excited about this. You can find more information about what Florida did. They have the timeline. They have everything laid out at their Department of Education, and they called their new standards the Florida's BEST standards. BEST stands for Benchmarks for Excellent Student Thinking. So again, we're going to start with community outreach to get feedback from parents and teachers on doing this for North Carolina. And then this will be something that the staff then reacts for what we hear from the community and moves forward with. So I'm very excited about it.
Yes, if I could make a brief comment. I'm delighted to hear this news. I'm going to say, first of all, NC, the department, those individuals who work, the consultants who work, the professionals who work in the C&I area work extremely hard on standards. It consumes so much of hours, minutes and hours and days and months and probably years to get standards right. We have a law that dictates, I think every 5 years, standards have to be revised. And that revision process begins sometime about second or third year in the life of new standards. So it isn't to say that work isn't done around standards. My concern always has been the standards need to be very clearly worded without a lot of ambiguity around exactly what the learner is supposed to know and do. So if we can move in that direction to have clear, I'm thinking of ELA standards, for instance. A standard may have 3 or 4 verbs within the standard. So if I were a teacher, I would be very confused as to exactly what the learner needs to know and be able to do. So if we can go in this direction with doing something other than Common Core, we can call it the North Carolina Common Core. I don't know what we call it.
I'm not gonna
Or
call
the
it
North Carolina Standards, the North Carolina Education Standards, whatever, we can name it later. But my concern will always be around very explicit information given to that teacher, and also some kind of metric within the standard or somewhere within that document. So the student, the teacher will know exactly what I need to aim for in terms of performance. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. This is something where we can really join together and respond to the needs and concerns of our constituents, and I'm really excited to start this work.
Has joined the conference.
Is there a plan to bring in any educators as part of the standard review process?
Absolutely. This is something, Florida did this very quickly, but they did it very well, and they had all the stakeholders at the table. All right, that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. I now recognize Ms. Sherry Thomas to bring us an update on the Every Child Accountability and Data Tracking System, commonly known as ECATS.
Good morning,
Morning.
Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, and board members. We are delighted to come back before you. I think we were here in October and gave you kind of a quick drive-through of what the system would do from a user standpoint. So today, what Carolyn Hudgens, our section chief for policy monitoring and audit, who has led the work on the special education module, is going to give you a demonstration of some of the reporting that we can do out of the system. That's a valuable tool for us at the department as well as districts. Just a side note, we had a visit from the Office of Special Education Programs, which is our special ed arm of the Department of Ed, last week. They came to visit to do a monitoring visit. And one of the things they asked for was to see ECATS. And so we did a demonstration for them, and they were highly impressed and highly complimentary on the complexity and the integration and the compliance, not just from a state level, but what the local folks can see that helps them maintain that compliance and stay on top of their required reporting, as well as the federal reporting we can do out of this. So we're thrilled that they saw this as a positive in our state and had really nice things to say about it. And so I'm going to turn it over to Carol Ann to give you a drive-through of the reporting.
Good morning. This time I'll try not to speak so quickly. Dr. Townsend Smith shared with me that at your places you have a copy of the directions where you have been given access to the training site for ECATS. And since that is now in your hands, I'm just going to do just a really brief orientation back to the system now that you have directions and you can actually get in the site and explore. I just want to orient you real quickly to some things that you may be able to find. And then, as Sherry said, I want to bring to light some of the reporting features that we can have with 2 examples specifically around aggregate data that is actually live data from the state since we have had the implementation of ECATS. And so as you log into the screen, the screen that I had just pulled up and logged into will be the same that you will see when you follow your directions to go into the site. It'll have a few things where you'll need to affirm that you're using this, of course, in the spirit that it was intended to be provided, and then it'll ask you to reset your password. Should you have an issue with remembering what that password is, your DPI email account is the email address to recover your password. And so from there, the step sheet will take you into further login opportunities. And from that point, you will have a test student that you can actually manipulate and create documents for. So this is the landing page. When you come in to search for your student that you've been assigned, you will go under the Student tab and click here on Student. You will just enter your student name, and then you will have an actual student that you can work with. I'm going to go into a recent student that I've worked with, just to get you to the further point of being able to see that you can go into the EC process here. And on this tab is where you would see all the documents necessary to develop, identify, develop, implement, and track an individualized education program, or IEP, for a student with a disability. And from here, you can certainly go forward and even generate reports, create some students, create some documents. When you want to review those documents, they're at the end of the page, but they're also in the student history. One thing that you also have available to you is that in addition to the student that you've been assigned to work with, you can see all the other students that are test students in the site. So if you don't want to particularly engage in developing anything, you can see some pre-existing documents that were created into the system. So we hope that that will provide you an opportunity to learn more. Happy, of course, to respond to any particular questions as you navigate the way through this. What I'd like to focus on now, and I'm going to shift just a little bit, is to the standard reporting. Last time I was able to take you through the interface, we got right up to the reporting mechanisms, and our time needed to be conceded to the next speaker, and so I want to pick up at this point. What I want to do in particular is go ahead to the advanced reporting. And if you recall, advanced reporting is our business intelligence tool that can, through a series of queries, pull in any type of data point that we would want to analyze for any given reason. And so I'm just going to pop out of this and go to a report that I've already generated. And for this first report, we actually have pulled this data out of the system, the live system. Of course, I have redacted personally identifiable information, but still wanted to show you the attributes of what an advanced report could yield. And so the query that I built to yield this data is I was interested in every 5th grade student that was male and participated in that end of grade with some type of accommodation or otherwise. I wanted to know their EL status and their disability category. So those were the attributes that I requested the report turn back for me. What you see on the screen is the results of those reports across the state. The first column, of course, identifies what LEA that student belongs to. As you go further along to the right, you can see the student ID, the grade level. It shows that it has pulled the query for 5th grade male students. Then we see our disability categories. Our EL status, we can further sort that to yes or no. And then the participation level and the area in which they're participating on the end of grade assessment are the last 2 columns. I particularly was interested in pulling this report to demonstrate the utility that this has not only with the EC department, but across our general ed programs and our other programs that might be interested in these same data. As you can imagine, at any given point, we might be asked about disproportionality, a focus group, a particular area of disability, a particular level of participation on an end of grade. So not only does this help with our federal programs partners when we're looking at English learners, it also helps with our accountability partners in the department when we're looking at participation. And then this just gives you an idea of the infinite options that you can drill the data down to analyze and compare against other data so that we have more tools available to problem solve pieces of work that we're doing here at the department and how we might be providing additional support at the local level. The second report that I'd like to demonstrate is another query that I have. And just of interest, there's over 16,000 results in this particular query that you can filter to your heart's content. So the next report I put in another query. This query was looking at females age 16. I wanted to know what diploma track they were on, whether it was in a regular diploma, whether it was extended content standards, and so forth. And then I was interested in all those students further who had another health impairment as their disability category. And then in particular, I wanted to look at whether or not they were being served in reading and where that reading instruction was occurring. Was it occurring in the general education setting or the special education setting? And then if they were being served, how much time were those individuals receiving their service? Quickly, as I demonstrated with the last report, you can quickly begin to identify things that would be of use to the department. We have some exciting work going on with our B12 literacy, and because this report was focused on age 16 and what types of reading services were being accessed by our individuals with disabilities, particularly in the area of other health impaired, that provides a data set that can be very rich in planning and looking at what types of services are being delivered to our adolescents who may have disabilities and needs in the reading component. And so, again, this can be filtered a variety of different ways. I got pretty specific in the type of query that I raised, but statewide, it looks like we had over 683 results for this particular query. It can be further analyzed for patterns in terms of where it is occurring in the LEAs, regions of the state, and so forth, depending on what the person running the query is wanting to know from the data inside of the system. And so I feel like this is really exciting for us to have just another set of information to help us with problem solving, to respond to requests from information that you may have of us in the EC department, and then to have some real-time data to help inform changes that need to occur sooner rather than later. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions about advanced reporting.
Questions from my colleagues? Seeing none?
Okay. So advanced reporting, of course, is governed by permission type. And if it were in an LEA, of course, the LEA would only be able to see aggregate data for its LEA. What I demonstrated to you was our aggregate at the state level, and so that's how I was able to see the LEAs across the state that had results that fit in that particular query. The next thing that I'm going to show you is standard reports. Standard reports are already built into the system, and if you recall from when I logged into the interface and I moved over to reports, standard reports is there. Those are a list of reports that are most commonly used or are found to be helpful for users inside the system. They don't have to build a query, it's on demand. Sometimes the returns are given back in less than 24 hours, but at most 24-hour return on the data, depending on how extensive that report returns is composed of. And so for this report, this is a standard report that a school district could run. And in particular, the elements on this report is called an accommodations report. And certainly this is very important to our testing coordinators at the building and district level, as well as it is important to our accountability friends here at the department. This gives us an analysis of those children and what state mandated assessment or district assessment that he or she might be participating in and what accommodations they may need to participate. As you can imagine, if there are unique things such as magnification devices and so forth, we need to ensure that those things are in working order, that they are a part of the child's daily program, and that they are available and accessible on the day of the assessment. And so, again, this is standard reporting. It doesn't require any query. It's a radio button, and I say, please run this for me. One thing that I'll go ahead, more of the same, essentially, they're standard reportings for IEP services. In my building, if I wanted to know how much speech therapy was happening in my building and did I have adequate staff to meet the needs of that IEP, I can run a very specific report around the IEP services. I have a copy of that to demonstrate, but I really kind of want to leave some space for any questions or comments or anything that Sherry might have to offer. And the next step with the reporting, now that we have built and continue to enhance the data that is inside of ECATS now, since we've been in implementation a little over 6 months, is that in our March Institute, which is hosted for all our EC directors and administrators across the state, we are providing professional development on 2 pathways. One, a beginner pathway for directors who may not have a frame of reference for reporting or using advanced reporting to initiate a query to return results. And then we have an advanced course for those who work with this maybe on a daily basis, and they have specific areas that they want to learn how to query the system to gather information for. And so that occurs the first week of March at our March Institute. And then it will be followed up with on-demand videos, written materials, etc., so that our field can go ahead and start using the wonderful tools that we have in place. I'll pause now for questions or other comments from Sherry.
So why did we show you reports today? That's probably a question you have. We have to respond to our results-driven accountability, which is a requirement of the federal government from OSEP. And so having data that folks can dig down into to see what's affecting their graduation rate, what's affecting their EOG performance, their dropout rate, it just gives them one more layer of information to dig down. What we find is that what we often think is the root cause of why our students with disabilities are not achieving may not necessarily be the true reason. So this just puts another set of tools in their hands. It's pretty complex. It has taken a great deal of time to develop the system at this level, but we also feel like in the next year, folks at the local level are going to have such a deep dive into their own personal data that will allow them to really enhance their programming. Questions, comments, concerns?
Can you just talk a little bit about the reaction you're getting from the field for this? Because
Sure.
I know it from, this has been something you all have been building since I took office in January 2017, and it's had a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but y'all finally, we got it through, because there's a lot of technical stuff that goes behind what you all put together. And so it's great that you all come up and show how easy it is to use, but I just commend both of you for all the work that's gone into making it so easy to use. I would love for you just to share a little bit about how educators are reacting to having this tool.
So we actually started, and I think I shared this back in October, this work started in the fall of 2013. And it took us until July of 19 to roll out the system. So there's a lot of blood, sweat, tears, frustration, prayers, and everything else involved in that system. And it has taken a tremendous amount of folks within this building and with our partners at PCG to get it to the place it is. It is very customized, but it's customized for the reason you just saw. We could have pulled something off a shelf and had it just be a general system, but by integrating all the data as well as the compliance pieces that we've built in, it's a stellar product. And that's what I'm hearing from the field. The angst of we've got a new system, I don't know how to do this, has really diminished. I haven't gotten an email, knock on wood, about ECATS in probably 5 months now. It's calmed down. I should have said that, but I'm going to say it because what I am hearing from teachers, and I talked to a lot of teachers at our conference back in November, what district level folks are saying is this is requiring people to understand what the process for special education is about. They have to know the procedure. They are not going to make non-compliant errors because the system will not let them enter data without going through the process. And for that, the district level is very appreciative. The EC directors are very appreciative. I mean, there have been hiccups because it's a new system. I can't imagine rolling something out and anyone expecting that it's smooth sailing with no problems. But the problems have diminished. The functionality is working. We just ran our first federal report for child count successfully, and we found only 2 students out of 203,600 or so students with disabilities across the state that didn't match within our state student information system or Power School. Only 2 IDs that did not match. That's unheard of because we're usually cleaning that up for weeks. So the systems are talking well together. They are functioning together. But from the field standpoint, people are actually saying, I really like it. And it is much easier. And what started in July with the problems and the frustrations, we're not hearing now. So I feel like we've got a pretty good mark on a success with it at this point. Now, if you're hearing something different, I need to hear that.
No, I heard a year before we launched it, and we had to put the brakes on it to make sure when we did it right. I actually heard a lot of frustration from, EC directors who were ready for it, and they were concerned, what's the holdup? And we told them, when we do this, we need to do it right for exactly that reason. We don't want it to keep breaking and not being easy to use. And I thank everyone for their patience and hard work as we got it done correctly, because now not having an email in 5 months on it is we know in this building that's a big deal.
What we need now is to get our multi-tiered system of support module up, launched, and moving, because they're anxious, they're chomping at the bits to get that, and they need that now to move forward with our early warning system, with monitoring their data, and so we're very hopeful that's going to roll out live in the summer.
Other comments or questions from my colleagues?
I have a very
Dr.
quick
Oxendine.
question. Thank you so much for this update. And you may have said this and I missed it, but who has direct access to ECATS? Is it just the EC personnel?
No, actually, every teacher, general ed teacher who has a student with an IEP has access to that student's IEP. We spent days and weeks and months talking about access and who had access to what. And so teachers can now go in and find those test accommodations without getting a piece of paper from their EC person that says, these are your students with IEPs and these are their test accommodations. They can add progress monitoring data. They can review the progress monitoring data. So that's the lowest level of access is an EC teacher.
If I had no EC students in my classroom, could I access ECATS?
Yeah. You could once the MTSS module rolls out. But you would not be in the IEP system, the special ed
So
system.
there is a special log ID for?
It has to do with the role type, and the role type determines what the access is. So it really bills, gen ed, as I said, gen ed teacher is the lowest level of access, so it's a view only. It moves to a special ed teacher, it moves to a case manager if that is different, or a lead EC teacher, to an administrator, to a central office level, to our department. And there are only about 5 people in our whole agency that have direct, full statewide access of everything for confidentiality purposes, but also we have to have a level to do some editing and monitoring as needed. So.
Sophisticated.
It is very sophisticated. It's a Cadillac. I think Kathy Moore said that. I feel like we built the Cadillac or close to it. It's not a Fiesta. Did you have a question, Mr. Wiles?
I don't. I'm the deferred. Mariah, are you going? Okay. All right. During testing for EOC testing and all with the rafts and accommodations, does that have any link into that?
Well, you can pull up the test accommodations for sure.
Okay.
And then the data from Power School
Right.
with those assessments will feed into the system as part of the student's data set.
Okay. I want to applaud you for this. This is going to streamline a lot of our processes when it gets to the school.
That's our goal.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We get all the help we can get. Trust me.
Yes, Ms. Morris.
I just want to say thank you so much for all of y'all's hard work. I am so excited about this, especially when you're talking about the link with the MTSS and moving students through with being at risk and whatnot. This is just going to be huge for a classroom teacher to be able to access the IEP and all the paperwork and the interventions right at our fingertips. I also think as we look at the whole child, this is going to be a great tool for pediatricians if some pediatricians are starting to send liaisons to IEP meetings to communicate back and forth as a role that I know in my district they're starting to do. This is going to be huge with streamlining whole child mental health care.
Thank you. Thank you. We've tried. We tried really hard, and it really has taken the whole agency to get this off the ground.
Mr. Buxton.
I wanted to first add my congratulations for the milestones you've reached. And you said something which I thought was especially important about getting to root cause analysis and the ability for this to help districts and our department do that in support. I'm looking at Trey back here and the level of sophistication in the CTE data that we have, and wondering, when we think about comprehensive support, Dr. Emery, and when we think about root cause analysis we're trying to do there, whether we feel like we have or we need to build, as we think about building even more robust supports, a system that integrates those systems and other systems so our regional support people have the power, the data they need to hold up that mirror to school districts and say, we can help you do the analysis on this data. I'm just not clear if we have that when we get out of EC or CTE.
So I don't want to speak for accountability, but my guess actually.
Come to the mic, please.
My guess is as our districts get used to using ECATs, we'll have that demand from the field. I think that a lot of it depends locally on how sophisticated your person is who is over accountability, because this level of reporting, I think, is more a local function than state function. So my answer would just be what we heard yesterday, be bold and ridiculous and think about how we might expand this kind of access. Because I think it's happening, but not as readily accessible as this system allows it to happen.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Superintendent, as I think about the power of the support that this department provides, especially to districts which struggle with capacity, the kind of data system we're seeing here seems like we would want that writ large, and we'd want the ability to help districts analyze that data and help our own people who are dealing with 400 low-performing schools, almost 80 chronically through the federal designation. This kind of early warning systems, this level to drill down to get root cause analysis, it feels like a next stage as we continue to build out those supports. It's very exciting, and it feels like it's kind of the harbinger of where our entire data system needs to move to really provide supports. So
And if I could add, the MTSS module that we have built includes that early warning system. It includes interventions. It's looking at attendance. It's looking at test performance. So it is going to give you, from an intervention standpoint, a much deeper dive. And it's all about gen ed. That is not special ed. We've just built it with our partners because ultimately that data needs to feed into eligibility determinations for special ed, which is why it's landed in our system. But it really will be a very robust collection of intervention and progress and performance that I think is going to answer some of those questions. Maybe not all, but it's going to give you a better picture than we have now, probably.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas, and we congratulate you and your team on this development. We look forward to future reports. We'll now proceed to our committee reports, and I remind committee chairs in the audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be done at the end of the agenda via roll call. We'll begin with a special committee on My Future NC, and I'll turn to the chair of that committee, Mr. Buxton.
Mr. Chairman, and I am joined in this committee by Dr. Olivia Oxendine and President Tipton Rogers, who couldn't be with us today. Excited to have round two of our My Future NC conversation. Last time we had to truncate it a little bit because, surprise, surprise, we had a very full agenda. And So we did just kind of a reintroduction of My Future NC and where things stand. Dr. Jenny Korn is back with us today. I think Ms. Cecilia Holden is sitting back there in the audience as well, to give us a little bit of a reminder about where My Future NC, but then to dive into the work that's coming forward and to have a little bit of a discussion with the board about some emerging priorities, early priorities for My Future NC in collaboration with all the systems, all the institutional bodies that are involved with this work. So, Dr. Korn, thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank y'all for having us again this month. I'm Jenny Korn. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at My Future NC, and I'm so glad to have the opportunity to present in front of our State Board of Education, working with this new special committee. Today, I'm going to provide an overview, like JB said, of our core responsibilities for My Future NC with some concrete examples, and then transition into a discussion about some emerging cross-sector priorities that are coming up through this work. As you heard last month from Cecilia, the work of My Future NC has already begun moving ahead in partnership with sector and local leaders from across the state. We have begun working on our strategic plan for My Future NC, prioritizing our work for the next 3 years to support the long-range 10-year goal. Our current thinking identifies these core 5 responsibilities for My Future NC: aligning and coordinating across sectors, convening and engaging the public, supporting evidence-based practices, catalyzing and supporting local and state attainment-focused initiatives, measuring our progress towards the 2030 goal. The next few slides will provide examples of work aligned to these responsibilities. We're going to align and coordinate work across public and private sectors. We think the makeup of the My Future NC Board of Directors is a great example of the cross-sector engagement facilitated by this initiative. Here you see some of the top leaders from the executive and legislative branches, public and private post-secondary systems, public K-12 system, business, and philanthropy. Working with this group is a real honor and a privilege across the state, and having these leaders come together. Chairman Davis is our representative on the board, on our board of directors, and appreciate his time and commitment to the initiative. We're going to be convening and engaging stakeholders from across the state. We have 2 kind of big milestones for this year. One on Monday. We have been working hard to get ready for our February 10th event. We're really excited. It's a 1-year celebration of the adoption of the 2030 goal for North Carolina. We're going to be releasing a statewide dashboard, examples of local county profiles focused on attainment along the continuum. We're going to be lifting up bright spots and having amazing panels of speakers talking about the work going on together around the state. Also wanted to kind of flag for this board that written into legislation is that every September we're required to present a report to Joint Ed Oversight on progress towards the goal, on updates on activities of the board, making sure that our partners across the street are engaged and supportive of this work, and recognizing when there are certain legislative priorities, investments that need to be made to continue to build towards that goal. We will identify, convene, and engage the public and key partners. So some of the local and state level partner engagement, some examples of that, in partnership obviously with the State Board of Education, the Special Committee on My Future NC. Additionally, we have a partnership with the Golden Leaf Foundation. They're going to be rolling out a brand new grant program called Golden Leaf Opportunities for Work. It's aligned to the My Future NC priorities. President Scott Hamilton is going to be providing funding for initiatives focused on opportunities for earning certifications, technical job training, soft skills training, and solving other barriers such as transportation and childcare that help people get back to work. They're rolling out this new initiative. I think proposals are due in March. And they will be providing some opportunities to talk with Golden Leaf staff at the February 10th event if folks are interested in speaking with them after the luncheon. There's also a partnership with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners that's emerged. It's focused on a presidential initiative on reducing the rate of disconnected youth. President Austin from Yadkin County has convened a task force of county commission members from across the state, And My Future NC is staffing that commission, providing recommendations about strategies that are working to re-engage those 16 to 24-year-olds that are not in work and not in school. There's also been an exciting renewed partnership between the community college presidents and the superintendents across the state. Walter Dalton and Jack Hoke are working collaboratively for the first time in a long time, these two associations, to identify together priorities that those two sectors value and want to tackle together. They're going to be convening a meeting of all the presidents and all the superintendents together this spring to have some of those face-to-face conversations in a really new kind of setting and new way. And then finally, the Public School Forum as a study group focused this year on rural education. My Future NC and the Rural Center are co-chairing and providing leadership for that study group. My Future NC envisions and always has a state-led and state-supported plan that is locally owned and locally implemented. This is just the list to date of some examples of how much work is already underway in communities across the state. We really feel like our role is to strengthen these existing local efforts, inspire new ones, and identify opportunities for regional projects and cross-county collaborations. As part of its core responsibilities, My Future NC will monitor North Carolina's progress towards post-secondary attainment. This includes working with the sectors, including this board, to identify, define, and report on metrics for measuring and improving outcomes for subgroups who have been historically underserved by post-secondary education to close critical attainment gaps. One of our big projects, we've been working really hard to get this rolled out relatively quickly as a baseline and a kind of stick in the ground, is using the state level education and labor market indicators identified in the call to action. So on Monday, we're going to be releasing the My Future NC statewide attainment dashboard through a partnership with Becky Tippett at Carolina Demography and the Belk Endowment. The dashboard will be accessed, will be live on Monday. We're really excited about that from the main page of our website. Additionally, for the past 10 years, Tennessee has been one of the leaders in this attainment work from the state level, really driving change and increased opportunities for Tennesseans. And one of the key takeaways from our conversations with leadership there has been the use of these local county profiles to drive adoption and engagement at the local level. So My Future NC is going to be developing 100 of these local county profiles that highlight attainment levels and performance on key education labor market metrics at the local level. They will help local leaders make decisions about the biggest gaps in attainment and greatest assets in their local communities. Once again, we're going to release our first 6 examples of these. Dr. Tippett and I and leadership with My Future NC really wanted to use real data, wanted to develop these in partnership with local leaders. We couldn't do that with all 100 in such a short time, so we worked with six counties. We've got 4 counties, rural western North Carolina counties, Mecklenburg County, and New Hanover are the 6 we're going to be releasing to start. And then we're going to use those as a way to get reaction from everybody. Is this the data you need to help you make decisions locally? What else do you want to see on here as we build out next phases? But the intent is to have all 100 done by the summer. Finally, My Future NC will advance the implementation and scaling of best practices through research. To meet this goal, the research-based call to action recommends 4 focus areas to guide the state's work. The focus areas evolved from the discussions that took place during the committee meetings held during 2017 and 2018, from technical papers commissioned and distributed by My Future NC, and from feedback we derived from statewide listening tours. There are 16 recommendations across 4 broad areas around education and workforce alignment, access to lifelong educational opportunities, preparation for education, career, and life, and comprehensive support systems. This report really sets the stage, the comprehensive stage for long-term strategies over the next 10 years for the state, and built on the work that this commission led and the work that we all working together from national research-based experts, as well as hearing from local leaders in the state. So building off that, we also have this work in 2019 of October 2019, so just last fall. The Education Strategy Group and the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, it's a mouthful, SHEO, brought together teams from 7 states to participate in an academy focused on strategies to increase attainment. Mr. Buxton attended that academy representing the board and the K-12 system. The other members of the North Carolina State team include Senator Ballard, Representative Fraley, President Hans from the Community College system, Andrew Kelly from the UNC system, Jenny Owen from the Governor's Office, and Gary Salamito from the NC Chamber. Over 18 months, started last fall, so the state teams will meet collectively 3 times to learn from national experts, share promising practices with their peers, and engage in cross-sector strategic planning. Below, you'll see a list of the strategies that are beginning to emerge to dramatically increase post-secondary success from the North Carolina delegation and their representatives. And these are more short-term than the broad call to action. These are what sorts of things can we tackle in the next 12 to 18 months to really kind of kick off the work of My Future NC and a real drive towards that 2030 goal. The intent is to launch an aggressive strategy to increase the number of students completing FAFSA, including more deeply and systematically engaging county and school district leadership, like superintendents, principals, and guidance counselors, and the state's financial aid community. We're going to increase student readiness for college by the community college system and the department working collaboratively to implement college and career-ready graduates for high school students. This front-loads the remedial coursework for high school students who are at risk for not entering credit-bearing courses, the community college system, UNC, or private post-secondary institutions. We want our high school students to complete modules developed in partnership with the community college system during their senior year in English and math to make sure they're ready, fully ready and prepared for life after high school. We're going to improve affordability and access by conducting a comprehensive reform of our North Carolina needs-based financial aid program guided by a recent UNC task force and report from the General Assembly program evaluation and national models. We want to create stronger incentives through financial aid for student success tied to credit accumulation, to incentivize student progress and on-time completion. Finally, there's going to be work going on around defining our North Carolina credentials of value. We had a broad stakeholder engagement meeting just yesterday to discuss the complexities of this task and the short, kind of abbreviated timeline. But North Carolina is committed to defining credentials that our state values the most, and then using those to develop stronger articulation between our high school career pathways into community college system programs of study that are linked to industry sectors on the K-12 side, and then also from a community college focus, reviewing existing programs and developing new short-term training programs that culminate in high-value industry-recognized credentials. I know there's a lot there. I was going to stop. I think JB wanted to pause for some discussion broadly and then specifically on some of these priorities.
Great. Dr. Korn, thank you, and great overview and presentation. I do want to recognize that President Tipton Rogers is on the phone. That was my oversight, dealing with some serious storming and flooding in her home community. So, President Tipton Rogers, stay safe. Just stay on the phone. Stay indoors and stay on the phone with us. I want to recognize 2 things about this. One is, under these priorities under consideration, I'd like to just entertain some comments and questions as these get built out. A couple things to know about these. One, the intent was not only what can we do in the short term to move some priorities, but also what are things that are cross-sector in nature. There are lots of things we are doing with the K-12 system to move readiness for college and degree and credential completion. But what can we do from a cross-sector standpoint? That's the 2 things. So early term and cross-sector. The third is, I just note, we also talked a little bit about adult education and how we bring folks back into our institutions. That is not as much our issue, but as an additional one. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor for some questions and comments about either the background on My Future NC and where it's going, or these priorities under consideration. Mr. Duncan.
Having worked in the area of education for 20 years now, I had not heard that much about FAFSA until probably the last 5 years. And the last 5 years, I've heard a lot about FAFSA. And I noticed recently one state, and I want to say it's Texas, passed a law that all seniors were required to complete a FAFSA form.
Louisiana.
It was Louisiana. This is in the right area, at least. And so I'm not necessarily suggesting we support legislation for that, but we do probably need to find ways to support that goal.
I'll suggest it. Let's do it.
To support that goal in order to get the FAFSA completion, because it benefits our students tremendously and fits right into then guiding the students towards successful careers, which is what we all want for each and every one of our children. So that's just one comment that we could give some deeper thought to in terms of how we deal with that, and it fits into all the rest of the strategies that follow.
Thank you, and that, it's a great segue. I'm going to come to Mr. Bristow Smith here in a second. One of the other overlays I probably should have given is, these also came out of our conversations with the other states that were there. So when you think about Louisiana, who was there, Tennessee, this will be something, I think it's on the next slide, that we are going to talk about for the special committee, bringing to the board as maybe our first body of work with My Future NC, is looking at FAFSA and a FAFSA requirement. There are states like Tennessee that have had remarkable growth in FAFSA that don't do a requirement. They do a lot of intense local support, and they're getting a lot. There are other states like Louisiana that are seeing incredible growth, and they're doing it through requirements. So learning about best ways to do that would be one thing that this special committee, I think.
Yeah, I will say in Guilford County, there's an initiative called Say Yes that requires a FAFSA form to be completed. And that's caused the Guilford County completion rate to be very significantly higher than it used to be. And there's been, as you just said, a great deal of marketing and push to get FAFSA completed as part of that effort. So there are ways other than legislation, but even that's not as high a percentage as we would like with a lot of marketing. So,
Thank you. Mr. Bristow Smith.
So one of the things I'm so excited about is that this work clearly creates the runway for students coming out of high school to be teed up for something post-secondary, and so I'm super excited about that. One of the things in particular in this discussion that I think is worth kind of connecting the dots with is this idea of credentials of value. As a high school principal in Tabari as well, we are held to an accountability model that talks about our high school graduation rate, our cohort graduation rate of 4 years or 5 years. But what we're more interested in is the value of that high school diploma. And what is the value of that diploma to students as we tee them up for life? And so yesterday we heard from SREB in a very robust discussion about how they're looking at multiple metrics for school accountability. And one of the things that they are interested in exploring, I'm sitting on that task force also, is the idea of a weighted diploma. So we're not just getting you a high school diploma, but what's the value of that high school diploma to tee you up for success in life? And whether or not that lands as part of the accountability model or it's just a metric that we end up reporting, I'm very excited about that because I think it has the potential to make that high school diploma not the punctuation mark in K-12, but more of a gateway to something beyond that. So just wanted to comment on that because I see a direct alignment between those two presentations from yesterday and then this one today.
Thank you. Other comments? Mr. Superintendent.
Hate to put Sid on the spot, but do y'all mind saying something about Mark's story? I saw the email that came through and my jaw dropped. And I think we really need to say something about him and the work that he did that really is one of those beacons of shining light for the whole state.
Thank you, Mark. Mark Story was the CEO of K64 Catawba, and he passed away suddenly this week. So he is a beacon for all communities to try to aspire to achieve that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, no, I hate to hear that because, I mean, really, K64, if y'all have not been to Catawba County to visit it, and David can definitely speak to it as well, just absolutely amazing what they did, and they are the model for what other areas of the state want to do, connecting K-12 to community college, to higher ed, to workforce, and Mark's story was a huge part of that.
That's right. Mark was one of those I think people certainly hold up as the example for other communities to follow. He connected education all the way through to the workforce and brought all the sectors together in a collaborative way. I know that David was a friend of his as well, and the community there is certainly grieving. Thank you.
Let's say one more thing. Mr. Story was on a panel for the County Commissioners Task Force just 2 weeks ago. And I think he's got one of his mottos was about leaving your egos at the door. This is for the kids. This is for the students in our community. And I think that that resonated so much. I mean, it always did. So I appreciate you bringing that up and giving us a chance to kind of honor him.
Jenny, you want to talk through next steps?
Oh, sure. Yep. So I think we're really excited, obviously, about an opportunity to work with this board to consider kind of some K-12 policy actions or initiatives to create the enabling context to drive this attainment agenda forward. Totally agree. I think that there are some accountability questions around the credentialing. I absolutely think that we could bring in some other state leaders, partners like SREB, ESG, to talk about what they're learning from other states. I know we've got our next Attainment Academy in May, so it would be great if we could bring some questions to that May sort of Attainment Academy and maybe even ask some of our other state leaders if they'd be willing to come and do some presentations and work with this board. A couple of kind of points in time. We have the My Future NC board meeting with the superintendent and the chairman will be February, May, and August. And then we also have Attainment Academy events in May and October. I'll be working with the special committee to think about what's a good cadence of kind of presentations and updates to this board so we can make sure we're engaging in time with those other convenings that we have going on. Anything else?
Any last thoughts before I adjourn this part? Right. Dr. Korn, Ms. Holden, thank you very much. Appreciate your making some comments. Ms. Superintendent, you bring up Mark's story. Sad to hear that news and wish the best for his family. But thanks for your work. And thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. Next on our agenda is the Transformation Committee, and I'll turn to Deputy Superintendent of Operations, Ms. Johnston, for an update on the Ernst & Young progress.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here to be able to update you on our EY efforts for the last several months. If you'll recall, goal number 18 was to create a transformation management office. This was to coordinate all of the program process and to report to you our progress on these goals. It might have taken us just a bit longer than we would have liked, but it was well worth the wait. We're happy to say that we have now hired our TMO coordinator for this role, and I'd like to officially introduce you to her. Dr. Sherry McLam came to us from DIT's GDAC, that's the Government Data Analytics Center, where she was the Business Intelligence Analyst. She spent 7 years with the Department of Public Safety as a Business Systems Analyst and a Project Manager. She's been at DHHS as a training developer and at the Administrative Office of the Courts, also as a Business Systems Analyst. From 2001 to 2008, Cherie went from a teacher's assistant to becoming a teacher of business and technology courses for college credit high school students in Johnston Community College. Dr. McLam was also a webmaster for St. Augustine's College before coming to work for the state in 2010. She's earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration, a Master's degree in Organizational Leadership, and a graduate certificate in servant leadership, and a PhD in IT, specifically in enterprise IT management. She's been a member of NC State's International Honor Society for Professions in IT since 2013. She's also earned a project management certification, an Agile Certified Professional certification from PMI, and she's a Six Sigma Yellow Belt. She's also published books on website training in a series that focuses on content management in WordPress. And as you can tell, we are so excited she's joined us here at DPI. She will be leading this process from here forward, and we've already been working on a much more formalized, structured process for this report. But as you can see, this is not one of those reports that is sitting on the shelf. We've given you a couple of reports so far, the last a full one in October, and really been focusing on Goal 18 since then. But Sheree is going to bring a very structured approach to being able to track and monitor not only our progress towards making sure that we achieve all the goals in this report, but also implementing performance metrics so that we can see the value of these changes over time. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sheree McLam.
Good morning.
Morning.
I am certainly happy to be standing here before you this morning. So I have been brought before you to ensure transformation management, quality management, and enterprise risk management. Those are my pillars, so I'm going to explain a little bit about how I plan to do that. So the first is recommendation 18. I'm embrace number 18, and I was hired on January 3rd, so I've been here a month now. Okay, so the tools that I have come up with to push transformation management forward, I want to track and enable the initiatives, coordinate delivery as to schedule, budget, and scope, and manage the communications plan. So the way that I have decided to do that, after an in-depth review of the goals and milestones of the recommendations, I concluded that the enterprise framework COBIT 5 would solve the issues of management and governance in silos. ITIL, which is a set of detailed practices for IT service management, will assist in aligning IT and DPI services, and strategic goals. And finally, Six Sigma, as I am working through those belts, to improve current processes and manage risk. Recently, I attended the directors meeting and was introduced to those I plan to work with in the coming weeks and months to drive those to a successful conclusion. The next pillar was quality assurance. I am tasked with leading the transition, managing stakeholders, managing communication, and mitigating risk. The EY report tasks the transformation with managing organizational change moving forward. This first task to manage organizational change will be tracking and enabling initiatives. To accomplish this, I've created a multi-project portfolio where each of the goals and objectives of the EY report is concentrated into milestones to be completed. It is my plan to meet with each of the directors and present them with the project plan to work with me to update them as major tasks and the time it took for them to complete each of the tasks and milestones, and then roll up to the overarching tasks. The third pillar was enterprise risk management, managing risk across the portfolio. So risk identification, risk assessment, risk response, risk monitoring, those are all the major steps in tracking risk. So I chose to use enterprise risk management using Lean Six Sigma failure mode and effect analysis approach. This will allow the TMO to work with the recommendation owners to identify risks attributed with the issues that they face, but also other issues across their departments. The FMEA approach allows for not only identification and response to risks in silos, but it will also allow me to look at risks across DPI to foresee any ripple effects that may affect other division sections and programs. Mode, meaning the way it may fail, and effects gives me the ability to zero in on the consequences of those failures using risk priority numbers and mapping them across the department. That's it. Any questions?
Questions from my colleagues? Ms. White?
Welcome to the team. My first question was, when do you sleep? Just excited to see a report become a means of action, and happy to have somebody on this team that will provide the oversight that's needed to get us to where we need to be. So thank you.
Any other comments? Dr. McClam, we appreciate the expertise, skill, and tools that you're bringing to this effort. Your management and organization will definitely drive this transformation forward, and we're delighted to have you and appreciate the work you've already done and the work that you will do in moving us forward.
That is my plan.
You bet. So, and this might not be best for you, might be best for Ms. Johnston. Back in October, we did get an update on certain items, and would appreciate an update perhaps in March, particularly on those that had a December 2019 deadline, and then whatever progress there is for those that will follow later.
Sure, we'll be happy to do that. Our goal was to get on a 6-month schedule for you, if that works. That would be April. But we can certainly, we have all the experts in the room if there are any specific questions on the December 19 goals. We tell you there were 5 of them, and they're all substantially complete. The components that are still in progress, most of them have performance metrics to measure the long-term outcomes, and those are still in development and creation. But if you have any specific question on those 5, folks are here ready to address them for you.
Okay. Well, I think this could be done in March. It's just an update of what is the result of completing those items and where are we in moving forward on them. But
good.
We'll look forward to that. Okay. Thank you. All right. Before we move to our next item, we're going to take a 10-minute break and be back at 10:20.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Hey, Treasurer Falwell, I missed the roll call of the pledge. I had to walk out for 5 seconds, so I want to let you know I've been on the call the whole time.
Terrific. Thanks for joining us. All right, we're back in session, and I'll turn to Ms. White, who chairs both the School Turnaround Committee and the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. Ms. White.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I love that, an engaged audience. This is an exciting report, and I am excited to call Dr. Cynthia Martin forward along with Ms. Julianne Garber. Dr. Martin is the Director of District and Regional Support, and Julie is our Reform Model Support Lead. They are doing tremendous work behind the scenes addressing our state's recurring low-performing schools. A couple of months, gosh, it's been almost a year, Chair Davis allowed me the opportunity to work with J.B. Buxton to form a special committee about how our state has developed a system of turnaround opportunities for our schools. We're before you today with some policy amendments and an update on the work that's been done. And with that, I'll be quiet and turn you to Ms. Garber.
Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, and other board members. My name is Julie Garber, and I'm happy to be with you to return with some Restart DSTR 040 policy update recommendations. So, to give you some context, I think it's always important to help align where we fall in line with your strategic goals. You can see that in goal number 2, we fall under goal number 2, improve school and district performance. And then within component number 1, you see the Restart Schools. So your strategic goal addresses Restart Schools meeting or exceeding annual expected growth. So, it's also, I believe, very helpful for you to see how Restart Schools fall within the theory of support for district and regional support, our division. So you, Dr. Martin presented this to you in November, and this is our theory of support and graphic that helps walk you through this. So in the blue, the top blue tier, we have statewide services. So oftentimes you hear about the regional case managers helping to coordinate the services, the statewide services throughout the agency. Then we move to diagnostic services, in which we have schools helping to assist schools diagnose strengths and areas of improvement for improved outcomes. And then in the third tier in green, we have strategic reform, and this is where we see Restart show up. So strategic reform is to address recurring low-performing schools who can elect one of the 4 reform models. And of course, Restart is the model that is most selected. And then finally, we have intensive interventions. And these are interventions that are for schools and districts that are partnering with oftentimes the regional case managers, and they are developing together, partnering to find specific goals, monitoring measures, and then a plan. So working in partnership to really address this intensive intervention. So I hope that helps you see how Restart fits within the whole theory of support. And, oh man. So here we are. I have to show you. There we go. So, you know how you have a punchline and it's just not there? I killed my own punchline. Anyway, so that's how we fit inside of district and regional support. Oh dear. All right, so since we were with you in December and shared this information, the Turnaround Committee asked us to go and seek out stakeholder feedback with some focus groups. And so we met in January with these focus groups. We met in Edgecombe, in Winston-Salem, Forsyth, Charlotte, Mecklenburg. We specifically chose schools that are demonstrating progress, and because we wanted to celebrate and give them the opportunity to be exemplars and to share some of the things that they're doing. So in Edgecombe, we have North Edgecombe High School with Donnell Cannon, and then in Winston-Salem, Forsyth, we have Cook Literacy Model with Dr. Paula Wilkins, and then we also have in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, we have Tuckasegee Elementary with Dwight Thompson, and so we are very grateful for them and the districts hosting these groups. We also had work and collaborative meeting with a superintendent's group, and then Dr. Emery also met with chief academic officer groups. So
I would tell you that it was extremely valuable. We found very amazing input. I completely believe in collaborative and the collective knowledge and hearing from the field, and it was very, very valuable, and you'll see that these focus groups help shape the recommendations that we're bringing to you. So with that, we have a quick summary for you of the recommendations and the stakeholder feedback. So in the area of academic gain, we heard from stakeholders, and they are agreeing on the components of academic gain that we offered and shared with them, and you'll see that again in a few moments. We also heard from them that it would be really important for us to communicate clearly what the requirements are up front. And those are in your, these requirements are in your packets. It's the workflow that's shared. And so we would definitely be communicating that to them up front and sharing it with you first. Then in the area of continued authorization, there was an agreement from the stakeholders that that a 5-year cycle of monitoring be used for continued authorization. And with that, they also expressed that progress monitoring was very important in this process to be able to provide intervention as soon as it was needed for schools that were regressing. In the area of DPI support, the suggestion is that when offering support, provide several options. And we have some great ideas that came out of that that we'll be developing. And then they also said that support should be required. And it should be required for, of course, after the 3 years of implementation, over the course of time. If schools are regressing, then their suggestion was definitely require support. And then finally, with remove authorization, and that language comes directly from the statute, the suggestion, 2 out of 3 groups that we met with, 4 schools that are regressing, that are not demonstrating academic gain, the focus group suggested that the district be required to reapply for the authorization with a new plan, and really making sure that that they have a plan that is being implemented and is working. So an overall summary for you. So we'll dive into these different sections. So again, in academic gain, the statute requires an annual report. The policy requires the annual report to document academic gain. And we've needed to provide some clarity about what that means. So we shared with them this recommended definition. Academic gain is the progress of a school demonstrated through established performance assessments, and then the systems that impact student achievement from utilized flexibilities. So this is the school's opportunity, not only with what's established, but what they are selecting and measuring themselves in terms of flexibilities being used. This is a great opportunity for these schools to address the specific needs and specific barriers that are in their schools and show progress. So as a review, we provided these definitions. And so specifically for you, I want to take your eyes to the flexibility outcome, because that'll be a component for the next slide. And a flexibility outcome is school defined. It's a metric used to identify progress in the implementation or evaluation of the flexibility, the utilized flexibilities. So you see that in the components of the overall components, and that, what I just mentioned, flexibility outcomes, is in a different color, yellow, because that is defined by the school. Okay, the stakeholders agreed with these recommended components. They shared that they were fair, that they gave the schools the opportunity to progress and demonstrate progress. So I'll go quickly through the 5 different areas and take you through looking at recurring low performing. This is the requirement for reform model schools. So you, in order to apply, you have to be recurring low performing. So the first layer then is the goal then would be to get out of the designation of recurring low performing. Next, we move to growth status, and this is from your own strategic plan. Of course, we know growth drives proficiency, and so from as well lining up with your goal. achievement score, those combined components defined by accountability. And subgroup status, this is also coming from your strategic goal. And then finally, the flexibility outcomes that the school gets to define. So they mentioned, stakeholders mentioned that it would be important to have these details, as I mentioned earlier, and those details are in your packets and in the workflow specifically. So I'll move on to the area of continue authorization. So the statute says the statute directs the state board to include procedure for removing or continuing. Currently, though, our policy addresses declining or removing. And because of this, there's been some angst in the field of what happens if I'm doing well? Do I lose the tools that were a key strategy in helping me progress? So we want to provide clarity and understanding for these schools and add language to the policy that says that ensures the schools that are demonstrating progress will maintain their restart authorization. So we're excited about this and have lots of support from the field and think it's an important clarification. With that, I want to share with you what was presented in December. There was a version 1 of this. So the most important to share with you with version 1, the purpose was to ensure that these schools could keep their authorization and even do less reporting because they're demonstrating their improvement cycle, their own working improvement cycle. So this was the first version. With this, from stakeholder feedback, we heard that, well, charter schools actually renew a charter, but we are not renewing a charter. So maybe the language of renew is not appropriate. And then with that, we also heard, well, charter schools are initially given by policy 5 years. So with that thought and discussing with the stakeholders, we presented both options to them and discussed so they knew. They actually, and those are the details of what was in version 1, they actually suggested and agreed with a 5-year monitoring cycle, mirroring the 5 years that charters are given. And for schools that are showing progress, they would just continue. For schools that are not demonstrating progress, they would have the opportunity to reapply, and we'll address those. I'm going to address that in just a moment. But you see here a 5-year cycle, and if the schools are not showing progress, there's actually 2 years of review, similar to what charters go through, that we would be able to review factors, principal change, which is a concern from the field, all the different factors that go into why a school may not be succeeding. So this is, because of stakeholder input, this is what we are recommending to you, a 5-year cycle. As well, this is the language that we would suggest in adding to policy. So schools demonstrating progress, academic gain, would continue to operate. And then schools no longer recurring low performing and meeting growth would continue authorization and only complete the flexibility reporting. So with that, I'm going to move to DPI support options. And with version 1, we had a 2-year initial pushing in of support. The first year was offered, the second year was required. But with the 5-year cycle, there's an additional year. And so with a 5-year cycle, what you see at year 2 is in green on the right-hand side, intervention is offered. In year 3, it is offered. And year 4, it is required. In year 5, it would be a finished review of identifying, is the school going to just continue, or after a thorough review, and again, I want to remind you the language is may. In terms of removing authorization, it's a may, not a shall. So this would be how DPI support would fit into the model. In terms of general support for the model, as these recommendations move through and potentially be and are approved, then we would be able to, as we have onboarding sessions, provide clarity for all of these schools and a strong foundation for getting started. We would be able to provide, as we provide feedback on the annual report, we'd be able to weave these expectations into that feedback. And we are already planning to facilitate some regional networking among the Restart leaders. There was great excitement in the room, as we had these focus groups, and it was great to think about the collective knowledge that could be shared as we move forward. So that's about support. At this point, I want to share this information with you. If these recommendations were approved and the policy were updated, this is what it would look like at year 2. So I'm happy to report we have 11 schools. If this were approved, we would have 11 schools that are no longer recurring low performing and meeting or exceeding growth. And they would be the schools at the time of review, that would be after year 3, that would continue to move on with only the flexibility form. Then we have 33 that are meeting academic gain, and they would just continue. We have 3 that need further review in terms of really digging into their flexibilities and those details. We have 9 that are still recurring low performing, not meeting growth, and their achievement has decreased as a net change over 3 years. And those would be schools that are offered support. And then we happen to have 2 K-2 schools and that we need to work because we need to work collaboratively with them because we need to find for those particular schools what's going to work as far as academic gain. And we're already talking with them. So finally, in this area of remove authorization, and I'm going to remind you that language comes from statute. Currently, our policy says decline or remove, and it addresses, these are 2 of those components. We originally suggested to you that in version 1 that perhaps needed to be added was this idea that a school the state board may remove authorization. I'm going to put that out there. If a school demonstrates consistent or persistent compliance issues with rules or requirements. In talking to the field, as I mentioned before, the collective 2 out of 3 groups that we met with, the suggestion was that if there's no evidence of progress in academic gain over 5 years of implementation, that the LEA would submit a new application with a new plan. So that was their suggestion, and as listening to the field, we are recommending that to you. So with that, I do want to tell you that I think this is an amazing opportunity to provide clarity within the policy so that schools feel safe in knowing what the boundaries are. In working with and talking to Donnell Cannon, I believe I mentioned this before, that some of his words to me were, Julie, without knowing some of these boundaries, there's trepidation in the field. We don't know what to expect. So imagine if we have these pieces in place and there is a clarity around what's expected and the safety, then we can foster innovation. So it becomes all the boundaries are set, expectations are there, and we really move into foster innovation. So with that, I want to stop and say thank you for listening to all of that, and I want to entertain your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Garber. Board members, that's a lot of information for you to absorb that is a critical issue for the students in our state who deserve the very best public education that we can offer. The conversations that we've had in preparation for presentation, and let me also recognize Bev Emery, who has provided tremendous leadership with this effort. From the field, my experts over there, I mean, it was like it was the bobbing heads. And so what response do you have? I'll give you first dibs on making a comment.
So I'm always looking for alignment, and I did want to just make the comment that, you were discussing the 5-year renewal cycle as being consonant with what charters do. It's also consonant with what we do with the cooperative innovative high schools, that we have a 5-year renewal cycle there in a process in place to just renew our memos of agreement with our institutions of higher ed partners. So I'm really excited that in North Carolina we have embraced so much innovation and flexibility through restarts, through CIHS, through charters, and appreciate the fact that these renewal cycles are being aligned.
Thank you. Ms. Morris.
I second what Matt is saying about the alignment, and I also really appreciate the clear structure and scaffolding that you're seeking to give the schools in terms of having a very clear, concise path. It seems very user-friendly, and I most appreciate the idea of innovation and flexibility as being one of your core values.
Thank you.
Levels of support is also awesome.
Mr. Wallace.
Yes, and one quick note, I was so glad to hear and see that even though the school and the Restart model is making academic gains and they're beginning to get it, you don't leave them. You still keep those supports in place and as they go. It's just like I use the analogy, with your little baby when she's learning to ride a bike. You hold the back of that seat, and even though she might go, you still run behind her. You don't want her to fall down, and you hold that seat again. But then when she gets it, she goes down the street, she leaves you. And she waves at you when you're going by. And that means she's self-sufficient, and she's going to go on to have a productive life. So thank you for keeping that.
Thank you. Mr. Hall.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. I'm thinking, you visited 3 sites,
Yes, sir.
talked with the staff and whatever. Can you give us any common thread that you found that exists between those 3 schools as far as the one in Edgecombe, and I know Donnell, and
Yes.
the one in Charlotte Neck, but did you find a common thread that says, here it is. Here's a possible one. I know there are many things that go into the process, but I'm interested in that.
Absolutely, that's a great question, and my goal is to dig deeper into those trends as well. But 2 that I will share with you that I've noticed in both Cook Literacy and North Edgecombe High School, it's come to my understanding and through reviewing that they took a year to really dig into planning, and they got stakeholder input, and they listened to the community, and they had a design team. So they really dug into it. Not only that, but they had consistent district personnel. So I do have to say, with Cook Literacy, Dr. Emery, I know, was very involved with that school. From my understanding, a direct line of communication, as well as Edgecombe County has Erin Swanson there, who is she's a direct support for Donnell. So here you see a planning, purposeful design, community input, dreaming, right? So innovation comes from really thinking outside the box and dreaming of what it could look like. And then somebody at the district who is staying with them, who coming alongside, right? And even sometimes in the district, you have to continue to push those boundaries of push the boundaries that are in place. Like if we have Restart, we can step around, and you have to have an advocate there. So in both of those, I can say. Now, I don't have as much information yet about Tuckasegee, so I feel more comfortable talking about the first 2.
May I just quickly?
Sure, follow.
And that's good. It's good to hear. But that is also, if it's working for the recovery, seems like to me it would work for those who are still struggling but is not there yet, and hopefully they won't get into that category. Is that being shared? I mean, is that just our conversation today about those?
So I think what I'm hearing you say is, why wouldn't we offer flexibilities to just low-performing schools, not recurring low-performing schools? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Or the ones that's on the brink.
Right.
Of becoming.
Right.
If what you said is working in 2 of those 3, why would it not be?
Right. So I think the opportunity we have here is as we get into further review and being the opportunity to highlight some of these schools, we can demonstrate what flexibility affords these schools. And then I think we can have broader conversations. I think the heart is, I've heard Matthew, I've heard Donnell say, I really want my colleague, my other high school principal, my other principal down the road, why shouldn't they have these opportunities? So I think it's a broader conversation, and as we raise up the exemplars and the excellence that's happening, we can continue to show evidence.
But I'm certainly excited at this point of what we have found, what we're doing, because that's that beacon
Yes.
of light
Yes.
that's out there. It's not as bright as we want it to be, but there's a beacon of hope. And those schools apparently has something going. In any kind of way, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank
I
you so
can
much,
talk all
Mr.
over.
Hall. Mr. Ford, and then maybe one more question, and we'll bring this conversation to a close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to echo the sentiments of my colleagues in that I think that this is perhaps, I think some of the best work that's being done in the state, and I think it reflects the desires of educators, perhaps more than a lot of things that come before us. But I think the question I have sort of dovetails from Mr. Hall's, and I'm focusing like on systems change and maximization of impact. And I'm wondering that as they go through these processes, particularly the schools that are seeing improvements, is there a requirement on the part of DPI for them to document their process, or is that part of their annual reporting? Because as I think about it, once we kind of see what works, as they're going through this process, can we perhaps offer other schools a template to say, hey, this is what was done in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, at Tuckasegee. This was their process. Here are some materials you could take to hit the ground running, as opposed to kind of being a pioneer, having to see what works and what does not. So,
Yes, sir. So the opportunity, the expectation is that all low-performing schools are required to submit an annual report, and that annual report is submitted through NC STAR. So we have shared the expectation that as the schools add a strategy that comes from a flexibility, that they add that into their school improvement plan, and then because of the flexibility of reporting, they also need a metric. And so that is the system in which they are documenting. So that's one piece of the system, I'd say, the school improvement plan, and then the annual report as well. Ask them to reflect on the strategies that they're using, what is going well and what needs to be improved. And so it's also documented there.
but do we distill that to kind of pull out and say, hey, after they do that, right, and it proves to be successful, hopefully, right, God willing, do we then pull that out and say, hey, this is the example of what worked, and this is the process that got them to that point? Has that been a thought or a discussion?
So my goal is to actually, so I think there's a first layer there, to be honest with you. I think before we, I think I'm hearing you say somewhat of a standardization. Here's a good model,
Somewhat, yeah.
right? But I would say that once we have clear expectations set for everyone, then we can move forward and say, identify trends measured against what these expectations are. And so looking at, for example, those 11 schools that I shared, I have dug into those, and that's why I knew about the trends happening with North Edgecombe and Cook. We can look at those, what's happening there with those 11, and really investigate. And then in the same way, look at the 9 and say, what's missing? What are commonalities that are missing here? So that's my goal, to do that once we have expectations set, because I think it's unfair, to be honest with you, to do it if they don't know. And then we move to some kind of more of a template, if you will. So I think it's a 2-part phase.
Thank you.
Great question. Yes,
Thank you so
please.
much. Add something to that, because you are right in our space. We're also trying to figure out, as we add this metric piece to the flexibility, how can we measure that having it in and of itself is the lever? Because if you go in these schools, these folks will tell you, after the first, I hired someone to be my AIG teacher, and after the first quarter, I realized I needed them to do nurturing or development with my population, and I shifted them because I was able to. And what we're trying to help them with is, how do you capture that so that we can have a data source that says it's actually the flexibility in the moment? And that's the tough piece. So if you have ideas, please shoot them to us, because we're where you are. I'd like to stand here a year from now and show you these things could be levers for flexibility for 487 low-performing schools, not just the recurring ones. And I think that's our goal here, is to be able to do that.
Thank you all. Tremendous work, and Mr. Buxton, I hope I'm not speaking for you, but we have tremendously enjoyed watching this evolve from where we were from our first meeting to maybe an increased urgency in action. So thank you for that.
Definitely speaking for me.
So, Mr. Chair, that concludes our report on low performing.
And you're next up with education innovation.
And that leads me, I'll just keep right on talking. Good morning again. Let's move to the Education Innovation and Charter School Committee. Jill Kamnitz and I work together on leadership, and we have 3 items for action. One is the EICS 1 2019 Annual Charter School Report. That is before you today for action so that it can be sent over to the JLEOC. I know board members had expressed wanted an opportunity to make a couple of further comments on that. So at this time, if you have any questions on that report. Vice Chair Duncan.
This is not in the nature of a question so much as a comment. I spent some more time last night studying and thinking through this issue. As I expressed yesterday, is a difficult one for me. And I won't repeat the comments about the modifications that were made, the red line versions that I made yesterday. As I said, some of them were I thought very good, and some of them were probably not as appropriate for this report as other comments were. So I want to stop and pause and say this. Our department does a lot of really good work, because they're responsible for a lot of schools, and this report is yet another item on the list, and they work extremely hard, have a lot on them. So I want to give thanks for that in the report that was provided. I also want to thank the CSAB board, because they work extremely hard too. I think we've all seen the number of hours that those folks put in, and I'm extremely grateful for the work and thought that goes into it. It occurs to me that there's 2 things in this report that are statutorily required that are one of them is mentioned a little bit, and that's best practices. And the purpose of best practices is to share with other schools, that all schools can benefit from things that are going well. And there are some things in there, and I thought they were good additions. Actually, I think I said that yesterday when best practices are in there. But I think it's a place where we could have some greater depth as we look forward. The one that's not been in the report this year or last year really is to analyze the impact that charter schools have on public schools, and that's in the statute. And the more I thought about it, it's a little bit unfair to ask the Office of Charter Schools and the Charter School Advisory Board to provide that kind of analysis. That's not what their focus is, and that's not where any research is being directed, nor does the Office of Charter Schools really have the personnel to do research or analysis in that regard. So I'd like to make what I hope would be a constructive suggestion for future years, that we actually convene a group of, I think we can all acknowledge the fact that there is tension between traditional public schools and charter schools that exists in our state, and we should not do anything other than acknowledge that fact and try to be facilitators of how we try to find ways to ease that tension. One of the ways may be to actually bring the groups into a discussion about this very issue, which is required in the report every year. It's not really in the report, but we need to find a way to incorporate that as we go forward. So I give great thanks for the work that's been done, and I mean it. I'm sincere when I say that. But I do think there's some things that are not there that need to be there ongoing, that are really important to our state, to work through this tension, what's the right balance between charter schools and traditional public schools, and how you get to that right place, to the extent there's proponents, obviously, for both. Difficult discussions are always the most important ones you have, and that's a just difficult discussion that needs to be had on a broader level in this state, and we're not really having it in a particularly constructive way. So I hope that's a way that we can move, and that's a real positive that can come from this. So I will now stop and say that because of all those things, I will not be in a position to vote for this report yet this year, but I know we have to submit a report March 15th, and so I'm not seeking to do anything other than say that's just the place I've come for the reasons I've said, but not for any reason to try to influence anyone in any way, shape, or form not to vote for the report, because we have to have a report that's put in there. And I do think, I'm trying to make constructive comments about how I think we can continue to better serve this area and serve the report, and do so with thanks to the group that have worked so hard on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Does any other board member want to make a comment? Ms. Kamnitz?
I will just say, I couldn't possibly add to what Mr. Duncan just said. It was clear and really thoughtful about what we need to be doing here, but I do share his concerns.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. So, Chair Davis, when we come to the portion of the meeting where we'll take a vote on this, we'll need to pull this item out in order to allow for board members to express their vote in a proper way.
Will do.
Okay, any other comments on that? Excellent. So we also have EICS 2, our 2020 charter school renewal recommendations. I will call Dave Machado back up to the podium to answer any further questions that board members have about the schools that are before us for renewal. So thank you, Mr. Machado, for being present. Yesterday, board members, we discussed the numbers. Okay, give me one pause. Somehow or another, I have lost my page. I want to make sure that I do not misspeak. Technology. Really, people? Julie, I'm sharing your pain. Yep.
Wait,
It's coming. Okay, yay. It's back up. So sorry for that pause. Okay. So yesterday, during our discussion, we had a cohort of schools that have been proposed for a 10-year charter renewal. One of those schools had a discrepancy between a recommendation from the Charter School Advisory Committee and then the Department of the Office of Charter Schools, OCS. And so in response to that, as chair of this committee, I recommended that Kestrel Heights School receive a 5-year renewal, and as opposed to a 10-year renewal, which is the recommendation from the Charter School Advisory Board. We want to be responsive to constituent feedback, and yesterday after the meeting, we did have several representatives from a number of different agencies reach out to us and call into question the exact statute regarding whether or not we shall provide a school with a 10-year renewal. So I want to tell you that this committee is charged to be responsive to policy first, to statute first, and then to policy. We must be mindful of procedure, for process, and most importantly, precedent. So in response to those questions, we went back to the Office of Charter Schools and we consulted with our legal team. And I'd like to, Dave Machado is at the podium, and I'd like to call Eric Snyder from our legal team to sort of explain where we are in response to statutory requirements on this particular school's request for renewal.
Great. Thank you, Ms. White. Eric Snyder here. There was a question about whether Kestrel Heights was entitled to the statutory 10-year charter renewal that's outlined in 115C 218.6. this is a statute that allows for charter seeking renewal to have that renewal granted without the state board's discretion if certain conditions are met. Those conditions concern financial audits, they concern the school's performance and its comparability relative to the LEA in which it sits, and also issues concerning compliance with the law, state federal law, the charter, and the like. With respect to Kestrel Heights, the CSAB and Office of Charter School put this in the discretionary category for the board to consider this renewal request rather than the statutory grant that we see when the conditions are satisfied. And in particular, there's a focus on 115C 218.6 B3 concerning the school's compliance. So, for example, the statute says the charter school, in order to be eligible for the statutory renewal, the charter school is not at the time of the request for renewal substantially in compliance with state law, federal law, the school's own bylaws, or provisions set forth in the charter granted by the state board. Looking back at the record, as OCS did when it was evaluating the renewal request and coming forward with a recommendation to the CSAB, it noted that Kestrel Heights sought its renewal on June 13th, 2018. So that's that time trigger that we see in the statute. At that time, however, the school was on governance noncompliance. And while that governance noncompliance was lifted on July 31st, 2019, there was in fact a noncompliance issue at that time. Further, there was also an issue with respect to compliance with some EC issues, and so there was some monitoring and a noncompliance issued at that time, which was lifted on December 30th of 2019. But in any event, this is not a situation where the board is sort of deprived of its discretion with respect to evaluating the renewal, and the school was not in fact sort of didn't satisfy all those points where it could get sort of within the requirements of the statute. So now the board turns to its rules and its charter guidelines that are in Charter 7 to exercise its discretion about what kind of renewal would be appropriate for the school.
So, board members, for additional information, we've placed before you the printed and documented general renewal guidelines that shows you what schools qualify for 10, what schools qualify for 7, and what schools qualify for 5. And this sort of takes out that subjectivity of whether or not we're applying the statute correctly. And I'm going to ask Mr. Machado if he has any additional comments, and then I'll allow you an opportunity to ask any additional question that you have at this particular time.
I don't really have any additional comment other than it was our interpretation that when the renewal process started, it is a 2-year process that Kestrel Heights was on noncompliance. And I certainly respect CSAB's recommendations, and I certainly want to note the great job that Kestrel Heights has done since their issues that they had, and they've come a long way. But it was we felt they fell in our rubric is at the time of the renewal process, they were still in a non-compliant state.
Board members, questions or comments for clarity? One additional comment from the two of us that share the leadership in this responsibility. We absolutely applaud the difficult and hard work that Kestrel Heights and their team have put into bringing the school back into compliance. We celebrate with them. We're excited about the journey that they're on. We want to comment on the idea that perhaps, according to constituents, that this might have been seen as continued stipulations or a continued reflection on what's been done in the past. We don't feel that way at all. We feel like this is an opportunity for continued and future growth. If you think back to an initial charter is granted for 5 years and it's celebrated. So this also should be celebrated, that there's 5 years to continue in noncompliance, and we commit. So I talked to you about policy and procedure and precedent, and this is our promise that we'll continue to walk alongside that school as they continue to make strong strides in Durham County to be a school of choice. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stick by the comments that we made yesterday and offer Kestrel Heights for a 5-year. Does any other board member have a question about any of the other schools? Do I need to articulate the 7, the 5, and the 3? Okay, so the recommendation will be that we approve the charter school renewals as recommended, with the exception of Kestrel Heights School, which will be offered a 5-year renewal. EICS 3 is our charter school enrollment increase and expansion request for 2021. Does any board member have a question about those enrollment increases or expansion requests? Okay. In our discussion yesterday, we had 2019 charter school application recommendations. There were 14 schools brought in and interviewed by the Charter School Advisory Board, and 6 of those made it through to recommendation for our schools. We asked yesterday that one of those schools be sent back to the Charter School Advisory Board for further review. So that'll be back before us for action next month. For EICS 5, we had Charlotte Lab Schools request to expand to a high school. It was shared that this is before us, that because there had been a financial compliance issue regarding a loan for the expansion of their middle school program, that is not why it was not an immediate request had come through us for approval. They are off of financial noncompliance, and there are no other loans that will be taken in order to expand that high school. EICS 6 was a amendments proposed by our ISD for some changes that need to be done in regard to the implementation of state law out of Senate Bill 522 that was passed in the last session. We had a monthly update from Dr. James Ellerby about progress and successes at Southside Ashpole. In EICS 7, we heard from Nash Rocky Mount about their request to rescind their restart application. In EICS 8, Guilford County actually submitted a very strong restart application. There's a considerable amount of energy around that application request. EICS 9 was a report to the General Assembly from Ms. Neha Shah Coltrane on the amazing work that our Career and College Promise and Cooperative Innovative High Schools are doing across our state. We cannot say enough good things about what we're doing to have our students prepared to be engaged in a global workforce. And then we have one consent item, and that is Alamance Community's request to amend its mission statement, and it was just a word change. Mr. Chair, that concludes our report.
Thank you, Ms. White. I'll note that EICS 4 is a discussion item and not for action, but without objection, we'll move forward with referring the one school that you mentioned to CSAP, Clariscience.
Thank you so much.
I now turn to Mr. Buxton, Chair of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, for that report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and along with Dr. Olivia Oxendine, we manage the SLA committee. Members, you'll remember yesterday we made a modification in the program and elected to move one of our updates on the K-3 reading priority to today. And so I think we have Dr. Molinix here with us. You may also remember in our 9-point framework that we're working together with the department, the very first one is our definition of high-quality reading instruction. And so we're going to get a little bit of update on the progress on that item, as well as the larger B12 literacy plan. And we're going to bring that up now. The one other, I'll do this by way of review, is we talked a little bit about the reading camps. That's another one of our 9 points, is how we're going to improve the quality and instruction in our reading camps. Dr. Tara Galway made a presentation yesterday. I'd refer you to the PowerPoint to remind you of that presentation. We'll come back to that in March. One question I think we want to be asking is, in addition to the plan to review the submissions from the LEAs, what authority the department may want to exercise over dollars that go to the LEAs in the event that we're still not confident that they've got a strong enough plan for the summer reading camp to do better than a 28% proficiency rate that we're seeing right now. So that may be a continued conversation in March. But at this time, Dr. Monix.
Also, I do want to point out that even though Dr. Galloway is not with us, we do have one of her literacy consultants here with us today who specializes in assisting with the reading camp planning and information with that. So we do have him also with us, Tad. So
Great.
thank you for being here, Tad. Okay, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So some of this is going to be repetitive, but I want to, for those listening and for those here today, I want to just recap what I went over last month with the update. I'm not going to dive too deep into it unless there are questions. I'm going to go ahead and get started. As Dr. Stegall opened up last month, the purpose for this important work is because we have the Read to Achieve legislation, we have the SBE's literacy collaborative framework. We have other entities across the state working on literacy, and we understand that we need to improve reading achievement across our state, especially among our earliest learners, so that by the time they go forward in education and matriculate through the grades, that they are prepared to graduate and be successful. So that is the purpose of the B12 committee. I do also want to point out, and I know you all have received this, we collaborated and put a spreadsheet together, in part to help us make sense of the collaborative framework, but to also make sense for you as well. And so on that spreadsheet, you'll see all of the working entities that are helping to make sure that those elements of the collaborative framework are addressed. And so I just wanted to point that out, that is there for you to view. Okay, I'm going to keep going forward. I mentioned the collaborative framework. Okay, so we are still in phases 1 and 2 of this phased plan. The definition is quite an extensive process. We are nearing completion of that. Just to reiterate our process that we've gone through, we started with collaborating and creating a literature review that was compiled with literature that was both timely and also timeless to help guide us as we drafted a definition. Then we drafted that definition, and the drafting of that as the B12 committee consisted of representation from all of our divisions across the department. Then we took that definition out to stakeholder groups, an Eastern, Central, and a Western stakeholder group, and we received definitions from them. Then we took that and revised that definition, those 3 definitions, into one. And then we took that one definition, and as you recall, the last month I was talking about how it was currently out for feedback through the Qualtrics survey, and we gathered that back and had over 1,600 responses on that. And so after we had collected those responses, we took all of the no's that had actual commentary with those no's. We put those into Atlas, and we sorted through all of those to code them and come up with common reasons, and so that we could address everybody's response from the field. We took the approach that even if one person said no and had a rationale, that we needed to take that into consideration. So all of those no's were looked at. We also provided an opportunity for the task force to provide feedback. We took that feedback also and looked at the themes across that. All of that feedback was taken into consideration, and earlier this week we drafted what is now our most final definition for reading instruction, for high quality reading instruction, and that will go out for a second round to stakeholders for a final review. Once we receive that back from them, then that will be the time of which we present that to you as a state board to see where we go forward with that. Also, I want to point out that in place alongside that definition work, K-3 Literacy is working on their reading plan, which is due to the General Assembly in October. And they are working expeditiously to get that out and as a draft with representation from across all of the divisions in our department so that we make sure that it is truly a birth to 12 reading plan that includes all grade levels and all necessary elements in that. So that is also going on alongside the definition work. Okay. Are there any questions about where we are at currently?
I have a.
Yes,
yes,
ma'am.
I do. Thank you so much for this update. Especially, I'm really focused and concerned about the definition. I hope this definition is going to be such that it differentiates what effective reading instruction looks, how it should look in a K-3 classroom versus a 6-8 classroom, versus in high school it isn't even called reading. It's called something else, probably literacy, content area reading. So I know this is mega work to do a statewide definition of definition of effective instruction in reading. But when I see the word unpack, here is my feeling that it's very thick in terms of wording, implications, so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying, I hope at some point it becomes streamlined and clear so that a 3rd grade teacher gets it. Mm-hmm. A 6th grade teacher understands how I am supposed to go about designing a lesson in reading according to something that's informing me in the definition.
Right.
That's just my point.
No, I think that's a great point, and that's actually something that the B12 committee discussed this week as well. And so we've talked about we have our definition of reading instruction, and as a committee, we talked about, how extensive does that definition become? We didn't want it to be too extensive that it wasn't a definition anymore, that it became a report. So we ultimately continued forward with the, I don't want to say quantity, but with the average quantity that was already in the definition. So we didn't make it some expansive document, but we talked about alongside that definition would be companion documents. One of those would be a glossary, so that any term that is in there, science of reading, that would be defined in the glossary, and then it would be further explained in the unpacking document. And we also thinking about, I wish Mariah was sitting right there, but thinking about the teachers in the classroom and how those are the ones that we ultimately want to make sure are prepared. But even so much as color coordinating those documents, so if you look at the definition and let's say the term science of reading would be colored turquoise, then you look in the glossary and it's turquoise, then you go to the unpacking document and it's turquoise, so that it's easy for a teacher to look at that in a timely manner and efficiently say, okay, I know where I'm going. But that is also in place with coinciding with the reading plan that K-3 literacy has under Read to Achieve legislation, and also the professional development and supports resources that we'll make sure are in place. So I understand what you're saying, and I think we're trying to address all of those areas, and if I've left something out.
I know you are.
Okay.
I know you are.
Okay.
It's just hard work, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot. It is a lot to create a definition of reading instruction that is birth to 12 and make sure that we are capturing all that we want to capture, but also making it something that's applicable to teachers in the classroom.
Helpful.
And helpful, yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Keep going.
Good? Okay. All right, and I went over last month the survey responses. We've already looked at all of those. Okay. I think that's about all that I need to update on this. If there's any questions, I can answer those now.
Great. Dr. Mullenix, thank you. One note to my board members, and I think Dr. Oxendine just set the table very well. In addition to teachers, remember the idea behind this was we'll have a clear definition that guides our work with educator preparation programs and the kind of preparation we'd expect our teacher candidates would have in terms of high-quality reading instruction. other partners providing professional development, local professional development. It gets us aligned and coherent, in Dr. Bristow Smith's words. Case in point, some of you may have seen the editorial opinion op-ed piece this morning from President Hans talking about their commitment to preparing more teachers in the state and being a partner in that. And one of the things he talked about in the editorial, and we certainly welcome his partnership and leadership, is how they can offer courses to adults who are interested in moving into teaching, and making sure, he explicitly mentioned, making sure those courses embed the science of reading and strong instructional practices for adults who might want to move into teaching at whatever levels. And so you can see how the importance of a clear and common definition about what that high-quality instruction looks like. So our partners are taking cues from us about how we need our teachers prepared and developed in an ongoing way. So thank you for the update.
Yep. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Mr. Buxton, if I could
Please,
just
Dr.
add a
Oxman.
point. I wanted to make the board, my colleagues on the board and others listening in, those in the audience as well, aware of, remember a few months ago, we had Kate Walsh visit us from the National Council of Teacher Quality. The report has been released. I think it was released within maybe the last 3 or 4 weeks. EPPs in North Carolina are on the move, folks, because an increased number of EPPs in the area of this report focused primarily on early literacy. 21 EPPs received A's or B's. That is an increase. That's something to be very proud of. And I believe one of the criterion that is part of the early literacy study does focus on the science of reading. So our EPPs are responsive. That's good. Good news.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Great update, and also a reminder that next month we're going to be hearing recommendations from our K-12 literacy and teacher preparation task force that Dr. Ann Clark has been chairing, and they have had, I think, a series of highly productive meetings, if my reports are right, and looking forward to some robust recommendations from them next month. Back to our agenda, Dr. Monix, thank you very much. We have one item for action. It's an action on first reading. You heard from Dr. Dale Winkler and Dr. Ivy Alford from SREB, who joined us to talk about their work with the Accountability Working Group, looking at school report card options. Let me be clear about that. School performance grade reporting options, which we've been asked by the General Assembly to take a look at, along with some questions about retest, alignment of our accountability system with this board's strategic plan, as well as the Supreme Court's definition of a sound-based education. We got some more feedback from the board yesterday on that. SREB is coming back and providing a more comprehensive report and series of recommendations by Wednesday of next week. We will submit a report with a status update on this, and the plan is to come back after more consultation with the department about our final recommendations that we will make, and then submit an addendum to the Ed Oversight. So what you'd be voting on is a report that essentially sends to the General Assembly the PowerPoint notes, final report, or next report that we get on Wednesday, and then we'll give a second report with updated recommendations in March. We have a number of items for discussion. SLA 2 is our kindergarten entry assessment, and a policy amendment on the KEA, as well as the interpretation panel. Dr. Ryan moved us through the updates to the KEA, as well as the way the department is rethinking the interpretation panel and renaming this to be clear to the field. That's an item for discussion. We'll come back next month. There was no discussion on that from the board, and appears strong support for that work. SLA 3, Dr. Howard presented our state's adoption of specific achievement standards related to the world-class instructional design and assessment English language proficiency test. There are also some technical updates in that. An item for discussion will come back next month. Dr. Galloway in SLA 4 presented the annual Read to Achieve report, which, if we didn't need reminding, reminded us once again that we're still sitting under 60% of our third graders at proficient levels in reading, under 30% of our reading camp participants reaching proficiency, and the continued work we need to do in those efforts. Dr. Galloway also talked about some of those changes and updates to supporting the districts in improving reading camps. And as well, we heard this recent report on the achievement work and appreciate the work the department's doing here. SLA 5, we talked about as we continue our Read to Achieve update was a discussion about proficiency levels that need to be set to determine eligibility to attend summer reading camps. And so we talked about a range that the department is looking at from 70% down to 60%, discussion centered around upholding a high standard for eligibility. And we need to give the department, come March, the authority to tell our districts what that cut score is going to be and what that proficiency level is going to be. And then SLA 6, we talked about advanced courses satisfying graduation requirements, and despite my mangling what this was about to start, thanks to Dr. Shaw Coltrane, we got it straight, and we're really just looking at an IB course that will satisfy a world history requirement, and then some other changes, technical changes to the way the policy reads to make it consistent. That's for discussion. We'll come back next month. Mr. Chairman, that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. I'll now turn to Mr. Duncan, Chair of the Business Operations Committee.
Thank you, Chair Davis. On behalf of Todd Chastain, we formed the Business Operations Committee. We have a quick review of our committee meeting yesterday. Had several items before the board. BizOp 1 is approval of a contract that involves the ongoing credit for purchase of school buses around the state. Kevin Harrison has presented us with that information and would fall under the contracts policy to be appropriate for approval by the board. It is a regular item. It was bid and it went to the low bidder. So it's a straightforward issue in this instance. BizOp 2 is the hurricane relief. Superintendent, I appreciate your report on Ocracoke Island, and there is some relief on the way from the federal grant. And as you have illustrated from your visit, it's badly needed. So Ocracoke and 4 other counties will receive 75% of what they requested from the grant under this provision. Thank you to Alexis Schaus for that presentation. BizOp 3 was Kevin Harrison again from Transportation, reported to us about updating a hurricane relief hold harmless transportation formula in light of the disruption that occurred the last school year from hurricane issues. And an approach was used so that the schools that had the greatest level of disruption in the federally declared disaster area counties would be held harmless by using just the previous year's formula information and not having it adversely impacted for ongoing formula by using information from the hurricane year. BizOp 4 is, those first 3 items were for action on first reading. BizOp 4 is an action item, and it was a discussion of our budget. We seem to be in agreement to support the department's budget request. In addition to that, have a number of priority items, and so not having received any further input at this point, I believe the sense of the group is to pass this item and these various items, but subject to ongoing modification, discussion, and meetings with appropriate legislative and representatives of the Office of the Governor with respect to the Leandro implications that are just in a status that they're not set in any kind of cement as we sit here right now. That we want to be flexible and ready to be very helpful in that process. And then also be consistent with our strategic plan, which we spend a lot of time on, and believe it's important to show fidelity to that plan. BizOp 5 and BizOp 6 were both discussion items, and they are both in progress, still gathering any input. Gotten a substantial amount of input, particularly on BizOp 5, which is the Supervision Administration of State and Federal Education Funds to support North Carolina's General and Uniform System of Free Public Schools, GOVR 7. And the BizOp 6 is the Contract Procedure CNTR 002 with a modification to that board rule. Again, those will come back to the board for further discussion and likely action at our next meeting. You had the normal reports on executed contracts and planned contracts received for February 2020. There were no questions this time. Also received the agency vacancy report. Thank you to the staff for the amount of work that went in on all these reports and on all these other items. There's a great deal of report work that's got to be done for the business operations, and people are working very hard to get these things done. We have 2 consent items. One of them is Biz Op 7, which is a local school board member nomination to the Task Force for Safer Schools. Patrick Tillman from the Guilford County Board of Education has been nominated for that post, and his information is in your materials. Biz Op 8, Certification of Finance Officers, is in this month. It's the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools certification of new finance officer there. Those would be our items. Are there any questions or comments on any of those items? Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. I'll now turn to Dr. Oxendine for the Educator Standards and Practice Committee report.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the Educator Standards and Practice Committee, and joining me in that responsibility, leadership responsibility, is Ms. Amy White. Under the issues session today, we have had a very enlightening presentation by Brenda Berg and Princess Brown, who are with Best NC, and they brought us up to date on some interesting things going on by way of improving the teacher pipeline in North Carolina. And the terms that they used are to streamline, to align, and to improve the, I suppose, the marketability of the teaching profession by improving the perception of what it means to be a teacher and the rewards of being a teacher. So we heard about the partners who are involved with this initiative. We have our LEAs, we also have our EPPs, the UNC system, as well as our independent schools. We also had heard a recommendation to make sure our community colleges are included as a partner in this initiative, and that was a very, very important recommendation that I'm sure that Ms. Berg and Ms. Brown will certainly entertain and consider. The next item is an action item, and that is ES&P 1, the EPP performance-based weighted model, and this is related to House Bill 107. Mr. Chair, I would like to propose an amended or revised motion, and it really is based on a lot of discussion, robust discussion that we had yesterday. Probably lasted, I don't know, a long time, I would say. And it was very worthwhile. Comments about the way we can make the model more robust, certainly how we can encourage our EPPs to consider diversity. So with your permission, what I would like to do, for the sake of board members, you do have a copy of this revised motion in front of you, but for the sake of those who are listening in and those of you in the audience who do not have access to this revised motion, indulge me while I read it. It's a multi-part motion regarding ES&P 2.
Excuse me, it's ES&P 1.
ES&P 1, I'm sorry. ES&P, that's correct, ES&P 1. I move that the State Board return to Pepsi the proposed performance-based weighted educator preparation program model so that Pepsi can consider revising the proposed model in ways that, first bullet, formally includes diversity in the accountability model in such a way that it accounts for the context of individual EPPs. The second bullet, to establish a threshold for survey responses that ensures valid and generalizable results for an individual EPP. Bullet 3, to differentially weight the elements of Domain 1 to reflect relative importance of the EdTPA or the PPAT. And the fourth bullet, to extend the duration of the sanctioning period. I further move that the State Board direct the Department to revise the EPP performance-based accountability model proposal report to be sent to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee to reflect the Board's feedback concerning these matters and the significant efforts taken to date by the Department, Pepsi, and the Board. That revised report should be submitted to the JLEOC on or before before February 15th, after its revisions are approved by the board chair and the leadership of the ES&P committee.
Any questions on that motion?
Thank you. And we will act on that today. And moving on to the next item, which is I get my numbers correct. ES&P 2, the recommendations for measuring effectiveness for teachers who administered the North Carolina final exam report. The NC final exams, according to what we've heard and what is included in our summary information, the end of those exams become effective March 15th, 2020. So Dr. Tomberlin shared with us, it was very, very educational because he gave us 5 options, and those options include student surveys, student learning objectives, formative assessments, computer adaptive assessments, and observation evaluations. And he shared with us the pros and cons of each option. Because of the timeliness of this, I think it would be important if the board see one option, one recommendation next month, so that we can move forward with deliberation and some decision that seems to be necessary. So that grew out of our discussion yesterday. And the last item, which is a discussion item, ES&P 3, the State of the Teaching Report. This is always such a helpful report because it's chock full of data that, you know, we could use in the teacher working condition survey, the teacher recruitment efforts, and on and on. So what we did learn from Dr. Tomberlin yesterday, we are keeping teachers in North Carolina. The 18-19 attrition rate is 7.5, and that's an improvement. The mobility rate for that same collection period is 4.5. So we have, I learned this is a new fact that I will share with my students at Pembroke. We have about 95,000 teachers in North Carolina. And the areas where we have difficulty, where we need teachers, seem to be in the grades 6-8, the middle grades, of course, and 9-12. And the recoupment seems to be strongest, and this is something that I would like to learn more about myself, in our small city districts. And one of the points that I remember in reading the report, it may have something to do, and I certainly am not trying to make some, draw some conclusion about this, but probably because in our small city districts, the attrition and the mobility rate may not be as high. Therefore, the recoupment effort may not be as difficult for those districts.
I'd love just to add something, just because it's so timely. On Tuesday, I was in Edenton, and we presented the Milken Family Foundation Award to Rachel O'Kelly. And she is a high school teacher at the same high school that she attended. And it really is just an amazing example of all the work we're doing with Teach NC, all the work we're doing to help districts and work through the community college to be able to start your career in teaching, to this idea of growing your own. And I think that helps the small district as well, especially in rural North Carolina, letting students know if you want to live where you grow up, there is a great path for you to do that right here in your hometown. And it's wonderful that we were able to give this prestigious national award to a high school teacher that loved where she lived, loved where she went to school, so much so that she got her degree and came back and is now teaching exactly where she attended. So I think
that's a very good story.
It goes right in
Absolutely.
line with
small
recruitment
schools and
retention.
recoupment. And that concludes my report, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Board members will now move to voting on items requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item in your respective, including any respective consent items. Consent items are primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month, and I know also that board members have seen these consent items for at least a week. A note for the record that Mr. Buxton is recused from voting on EICS 2. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent action or action on first reading agendas, noting that we will vote separately on EICS 1 Charter School Annual Report. Is there any request to remove any other items? Seeing none, I ask for a motion to approve the following: the January 8th and 9th, 2020 meeting minutes, the January 24th, 2020 meeting minutes, ESNP 1 with the multi-part motion read by Dr. Oxendine, EICS 2 with motion by Ms. White to approve the recommendations of CSAB with the exception of Crystal Heights, which would be for a 5-year renewal, EICS 3 and 10, SLA 1, BizOp 1 through 3, and 7 through 8, 1 through 4 in the BizOp items, and the school bus finance contract as presented by Mr. Duncan. Well, first, let me ask for a motion to that effect. Motion by Mr. Ford. Is there a second by Mr. Hall? Any questions on that motion or any item in that motion? Seeing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes, again noting recusal from EICS 2.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Thank you. The motion carries. Next, I ask for a motion to approve EICS 1 Charter School Annual Report.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the charter school annual report.
Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Keenan. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
No.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
No.
Chair Davis?
No. Motion carries. That concludes our action items. Thank you to all staff and presenters for this February 6, 2020 meeting. Board members, this also concludes our committee meetings for the day. Does anyone have any items of new business? Seeing none, I ask for a motion to adjourn this February 6th State Board of Education meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Buxton. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tipton Rogers.